Welcome back to our roundtable discussion on music creation with Pro Tools with Beatie Wolfe, Lazaro Casanova and George Seara. Just sort of so think about maybe some specifics. So I know that lots of people kind of want to know about sort of instruments and plugins and what people are using sort of to get their sound. So maybe Laz, we'll start with you. Sort of are there any sort of you've mentioned kind of using Machina and so on. Are there any other sort of virtual instruments that you kind of use in your work that you sort of that your kind of go-tos?
So from there's a couple of instruments and Pro Tools that I really like. The Vacuum, which now I'm using the Vacuum Pro. It has like just super gritty sounds that are great for like a dance floor. When you're making house techno music. I do default a lot to the reverb. I do like a lot the deverb that's on there. I think now it's called air reverb. I do use the delays in there. I do have the Pro stuff. The Pro limiter I love. The Pro compressor is amazing as well. The tape, the real tape saturations, the Bomb Factory. There's a lot of stuff in there. Like it's actually one of those things that I came to a realization that I wasn't utilizing, or I wasn't even aware of a lot of the stuff that was in there out of the box until one day I sat down. I don't know how bored I was, and I was like, oh, let me just start opening one by one and start going through these. I have tried over the last couple of years to try to segue a little bit more into outboard gear and actual hardware stuff. But like I said, it hasn't impacted anything of my workflow because it's all been fairly easy to just route MIDI into there and get it all talking and working with without any crazy headaches.
Cool. So George, what about you from the sort of I guess more from an engineering point of view? I mean, I guess there are going to be some go-to plugins, but maybe there are some instruments as well that you incorporate into your work.
Yeah, well, I'll say this, that even without thinking of them as plugins, maybe they could be sort of plugins, but using elastic audio and some of the vary speed functions, audio quantize, beat detective, when used subtly and used to enhance performances in acoustic recordings, audio quantize, for example, those tools get used a lot, and also another feature that was recently released in the last year or two, Soundbase. So Soundbase, that's sort of tucked away right next to Workspace, is pretty brilliant. And what happens is if you have sample libraries, you're able to, there's like a little metronome type. It looks like a little dot that you click on. And with that function, it allows whatever samples or loops that you happen to have, and they could be acoustic loops. You could have a shaker loop. Whatever it happens to be, you can quickly audition in real time, to the tempo that you're currently working at, and lay in ideas. And so I think that those tools are pretty amazing. And so for someone who is often recording acoustic instruments, but sometimes challenged to inject a little bit of an electronic element or something, whether it's to beef up the drums or the bass, etc. Laz, you touched on it too. I haven't used it yet, but I'm really excited to use the audio to MIDI new feature that's been added. That sounds really cool. And then, there's just so many plugins that I almost take for granted. But if you just owned a basic version of Pro Tools, it basically has every tool that you would need. From Air Technologies has a lot of like saturation, kind of distortion, cool plugins that are pretty inspiring. EQs right out of the gate that are amazing. Compression. It's got a lot of great stuff just built in.
I want to do a plus one on what you said about the elastic audio. That thing is especially the auditioning. I usually do it through the like a file browser window, but it's been a godsend with Splice actually. Whenever I hit like a roadblock, it's pretty easy with the Splice app. You could just, whatever samples or loops you've already purchased, you can just pretty much drag them from the app into, once you addition them, you could just drag them into your project, and it's like already like lined up at the tempo you wanted. And the other thing you were saying about the Air Technology plugins, those, I remember when they got announced, it was like a big step forward, because I was like, oh man, now all of a sudden we have all this extra stuff. And the EQs and even like the Focusrite EQs that they've added in there, what I was going to say is just the sound. I'm not even aware of the thing you were saying with the sound space or with sound browser. Soundbase. I do it. I don't know if this is the same thing, but the way I do it is just I just use a file browser, and there I just kind of like. But I now got to look at Soundbase because it sounds amazing.
It's really great.
And that's the thing.
All
with
right,
Pro
we're all
Tools.
doing a lot of talk, but it's really great.
Yeah, no, that's the thing with Pro Tools. I always feel like there's layers in there that like sometimes you'll just be amazed at like things that you're not aware of just in conversation with someone, because there's many ways of achieving your end game there. And like you just said, you're using the elastic audio one way. I'm using it another way, but it works both ways.
So, Beatie, you seem to get involved with some pretty amazing sound design projects. So, are there any sort of particular sort of instruments or synths and so on that you like to use to create your soundscapes?
Yeah, I mean, it's again like the two other pros on this panel. Like, I'm definitely more in that space of kind of dialing some of that stuff down just in general, because I'd usually find that sort of with the instrument playing it in, whether it's like with a pedal or a certain way of playing it. But I think that, just off the bat, like one thing that I really like that comes to mind is sort of globally is just heat. I mean, it's pretty obvious, and it's pretty, I know it's been around for a while, but, definitely in the sort of tape saturation space, also with a lot of the Abbey Road collection, the plates, reverbs, saturations, I'm, really keen on them. The Arturia virtual collection I really like as well. I think that's just very solid. Some of the Slate mix rack, more for like mastering and mixing. But yeah, I think it's generally like, and it's not surprising I have Leonard Cohen behind me, and so it's more in that realm of like keeping things also raw and having I think the one issue I see is the more that we can iron out imperfections, make things perfectly in time, perfectly in tune, everything becomes so sort of intuitive on the AI side in many ways. And I think so much of what makes us feel is the rawness, is the realness, is the human touch. It's the imperfections that you would never program or put in the first place. That would be like, oh, that take's actually a little off, but there's something about it, or whatever version of that there is. And so I guess I'm always conscious that just because we can, it doesn't mean we should. And if we're doing it, we have to have a really good reason for doing it for specifically that project. Like, okay, this is going to be better realized if we, bring this into the equation. So that's kind of my take.
No, that's really interesting. Something we've sort of touched on, I guess, a couple of times. Each of you have spoken about the kind of the mixing process, mixing and mastering, and it seems to me, as someone who's sort of come from or started out in a very sort of traditional analog studio where there was, you kind of did this and then this and then this and then this. Everything sort of, the whole production process has really sort of kind of merged into almost a single process. So I wonder how you sort of see the role of kind of mixing and mastering, do you sort of see that as something which happens at the end, or is that kind of a more organic part of the way that you work?
I like doing it as I'm working, just because it for me it's an easier workflow, because at the very end, I don't come from a mixing and mastering background. I just come from someone who wants to make music to play at a club and make it sound good enough that other people want to play it as well. And for me, it's I've noticed one thing with Pro Tools. I've never really ran into too many issues of redlining. I feel like there's enough headroom there to begin with. Obviously, it's something you can fix easily if you do run out of headroom. But compared to other DAWs I've worked in, I always find myself creating more headroom because I'm constantly hitting that red line a lot easier. One thing I do like to do at the very end is I do like to, there's a plugin I use by Brainworks, the Digital 2, I think it's called. It's basically just to give it a little bit of stereo width. But a thing I do go into Pro Tools, it's in the pan def law. I do change that to 4.5, which I think is the SSL. It defaults at 3. It kind of makes me, when I'm doing some panning and stuff, it kind of makes it a little bit easier for me. But I definitely, I'm in the boat of doing it while I'm working and save myself some work on the tail end.
How about you, George? Because obviously you're sitting, you've got a fantastic mixing console there. But how when you're sort of working with an artist, how are you thinking about the mix as you're actually progressing along the road of the production?
Yeah, I think using Shawn as an example, again, just because it was a recent project and a big one that I worked on for several months, with multiple sort of collaborators, and everyone having some Pro Tools ability, I think it sounds dangerous to say this, but it's not actually when you're working with really creative, talented people, that everyone sometimes takes turns sitting down at the canvas and adding their ideas. And sometimes, it just takes maybe just balancing them a little bit afterwards and saying, okay, I think I know what it is that, you'd like to do here. Maybe it's, it's a tape style slap or something like that. Then we can refine it a little bit together. But oftentimes I find that working in a system like Pro Tools, it's in every studio around the world. I would say most, speaking of just maybe pop music or other genres of music as well, it still is, at the forefront of the most commonly used mixing platform in some ways. So I would say just recording in Pro Tools and building as we do naturally these days and get inspired as we're building, it's nice to know that whoever mixes it, whether it's me or whether it ends up being somebody else, that our work can go where we exactly left it to the next person, whoever that person happens to be, and they can see what we did and they can say, okay, I think I like this, or I think I can do something slightly different here. I think it's amazing. So we're always sort of building, and it's nice to know that, I mix a lot of different projects that come from other workstations. And oftentimes I find that we'll ask to receive, my assistant will say, can we have the dry, can we have the wet, which means that oftentimes they'll be printing stems of here's the, the wet sounds, and then here are the dry sounds. So we can pick and choose and see what we'd like to work with. With Pro Tools, it can all stay almost live until the point that we're saying, we love this, we're done.
Have you, a quick question, have you been able to use the cloud collaboration yet? Because that's like something that I haven't used, but it looks very intriguing.
Yeah, I haven't myself. Maybe Beatie, you could chime in on. I'm not sure. I know you sometimes say you're collaborating with different folks in different areas. I haven't used it yet myself. I'll be honest with you.
Right.
Just, I guess, picking up on sort of the mixing mastering side of things, which again, Beatie, you mentioned that yourself. Is that so? When you're on your own projects, do you work on them all the way through to the end, or do you ever hand them over to somebody else to kind of finish off that mixing mastering piece?
Well, when I, the first couple of records, I do pretty much everything except for the mastering, but working with someone else. The stuff with Linda, we'd get into the mixing, but then we'd have a dedicated mix engineer and mastering engineer for the various tracks, and different people for different tracks. What I'm doing now, which, honestly, it's just been a lot of fun, like just learning and exploring and trying things. And yeah, I've been like, well, why not? See what I now have, 15 years of working with other people, and always being very much involved in that process, to the point where I'm sure, like a lot of people, it's like the same with this V&A show. They said they never had an artist that was in the show the whole time, but I was fascinated with seeing how people responded to it, and that was the whole point. So I think in that same way with the music, I never want to step out of the room, because the mixing, the mastering, all of that is part of the realization of that inherent arrangement you hear when you first write the track. And yes, if it's a great song, piano, guitar, just playing it on a piano guitar should in theory still sound great. But I would hear those arrangements in my head as well. So I'd want to take it to the end, because it was so much, hearing this thing that you've kind of imagined. So I think now what's just been a lot of fun is just playing with stuff. And there's a mastering guy I work with who's wonderful, who did a lot of Wim Wenders films and David Lynch films. So he's more in that world, and he's someone that I absolutely trust when I hand stuff over to, as in he's actually way too qualified for probably any of the things I'm giving him. But I just like also seeing what I can do along the way, and seeing what new skills I can learn, and just not really having any parameters that are like, okay, this isn't your realm of expertise, so you can't explore, Yeah,
no, absolutely. That certainly seems something which has been opened up with, access to technology that everybody has now. That's for sure. Beatie, I think you sort of touched this yourself, but maybe we can open this up to everybody. But obviously 2020 has been a challenging year, let's put it that way. So what are the what positives have you seen with regards to your kind of work and creativity, maybe over this kind of past year or so? Are there any?
Oh no, I'm sorry. I wasn't sure if it was like a question back to BT. Sorry. So for me, the biggest positive has been just the extra time I've had. I've being a DJ, most of my income is always, unfortunately, it's always been not from the music side, but from the performance side. And that is like a weekly schedule of 2 or 3 gigs a week. And sometimes I haven't given myself the time to be able to work on certain projects, like the album that I just released, titled 1986. That was my first album ever, and I've been making music for 16 years. It's always been singles, EPs. An album is something I've never really had the time to sit down and just lock myself in somewhere for months at a time. And before I even went down that route, I was able to also sit down and start looking at YouTube tutorials for pieces of gear that I haven't mastered, nowhere near mastering, but things that I've gotten recently, like the Peak, the Digitact, and just watching other people teach me about those things has incredibly allowed me to step up my game as far as how to use those pieces of gear and get more creative. So that's one thing I am thankful for this year is just extra time to focus on my craft and my passion.
How about you, George?
Sorry, the question was again, what was special?
Well, I think any sort of positive sides that come out of, some of the limitations of the past year, but positive sides in terms of kind of creativity or the way that you work?
Yeah, oftentimes I'm mixing these days, and so I spend quite a bit of time alone mixing and working on various projects and bouncing to and from those projects. And sometimes I miss the camaraderie that can only develop when you work directly with the artist on their project. And so I'm pretty thankful to Shawn Mendes because he invited me out to be a part of this album project, and we had to navigate this COVID thing, and in doing so, we weren't quite sure how things were going to go, but we ended up setting up. I sort of coordinated, set up this remote studio in Big Sur, California, and we had just a little house, and we stayed together for some 45 days. And made an album. And during that time, the friendships that developed only became, closer. And not just making music, but eating together and just sharing stories together late night. I think it really made for something that is memorable to me for a lifetime, and we refer to ourselves as a little commune at one point, having spent that amount of time together. So, anyways, COVID, it's really helped to slow things down a little bit. So, rather than working on a multitude of projects, I worked on one project, and that can be a bit of a challenge for someone who is used to being sort of always rapid firing to now stop and do one thing.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So, Beatie, I think you've already talked a little bit about this, but you're saying that essentially, so that enforced change has seen some benefits for you.
Yeah, I mean, definitely from a perspective of just learning things I probably wouldn't have had time to learn. This environmental protest project, which was built using 800,000 years of historic data to create a timeline of the planet, which is simultaneously the planet's timeline, a protest song, and a reimagining of the music video format. That was going to be in all these festivals across the summer and getting a Cannes Lion and a number of awards, and obviously all of that cancelled. But then on the flip side, I was thinking, well, we're all staying at home more, and in terms of the environmental impact, is it going to be huge? No, but is it in the right direction? And so that's sort of, a little of an odd statement. But I think this year, my hope is that it's given people a chance to reflect on what matters, and it's given people this additional time and space to sort of really reassess what they're doing or what we're all doing. Because I feel like, our relationship with the natural world has got, very disconnected, and our relationship with art has got very disconnected. And the whole idea that art is just this background entertainment that doesn't serve any purpose beyond, just a lot of empty gratification. I feel like art's role right now, particularly at this point in the history of humanity, is that we have to be making amazing art, and we also have to be just living in a way that is sustainable, and on every level, not just environmentally, but sociologically and politically and everything that's come up in this last year. I feel like it's a great chance for us to reset.
So looking to the future, what does the future hold for you? What excites you about, looking ahead in your sort of creative life?
I think, just to touch a little bit of what BT was saying, I do think with art right now, historically, we're going to look back and we're going to see like this might have been maybe by mistake, it might have been like a Renaissance era of music and art, because a lot of people I know, even artists that I personally admire, have all released albums this year. A lot of people have seemed to be able to start releasing music and focus. And I think in hindsight, when we do the numbers, maybe 2020 is going to have a lot more releases than, you know, other years prior might have had. Moving forward, I do for the future for me, I have my label that I self-released my album just because I wanted to have a full creative control visually. I actually bought like a bunch of old circuit bent video gear and just making glitch art to the music, stuff that I normally would never touch the visual aspect of things. So I think now I've somehow stumbled across another form of art that I do enjoy doing. I bought some old VHS-C camcorders. I'm doing footage, like, you know, just weird kind of things that add to my art, to my music, especially now with social media. Instagram is so visual. There's so many visual things out there that I felt I needed. I lacked some sort of, you know, visual voice in my music. And I do think that everyone moving forward from now is going to maybe appreciate, you know, when life gets back to normal, you know, a gathering, even visiting your family for the holidays, or, you know, as far as nightlife, I know a lot of us dearly miss DJing for a full dance floor. We miss traveling. We miss, you know, just the connection of not just DJing from home on a live stream. You know, a lot of us DJs, we don't pre-plan our sets or our music. You know, we just sometimes go in there blind, and, you know, depending how the crowd reacts, we feed off of that. I miss all of that interaction, and then as soon as it comes back, you know, not that I took it for granted before, but I'll definitely extra not take it for granted now.
And George, any thoughts on what the future holds for you?
Well, I haven't done it yet, but I'm looking forward to delving more into Atmos and immersive audio. So super intrigued. You know, have quite a bit of experience mixing surround, not so much experience mixing Atmos. So I'm sort of setting up a new studio space in this building. And it's not quite ready yet, but it'll be another SSL room. I bought an SSL and bought it from Pete Townsend of The Who. And so anyways, the SSL desk shipped over from the UK, and we're setting up a new room here, and looking forward to integrating some Atmos abilities so that we'll be able to do things, whether analog or whether fully in the box. And also integrate some Dante. I don't know if anyone of you are using Dante, but I just am so intrigued again about these situations where we're constantly challenged to find ways, creative ways to make things work. So for me, when I think of situations where, you know, I want to be able to inspire the artists that I'm working with. So Dante, to me, just seems to open up a world of possibilities that I can run feeds, whether it's headphones, discrete feeds, or record, you know, from a rooftop or wherever, you know, we need to capture it properly and do it very easily over, you know, essentially a Cat, you know, 5 cable.
Cool.
Amazing.
So, Beatie, you'll get the final word on that one. How's the future looking for you?
Pressure. You know, so I mentioned the environmental project. That's going to be at the London Design Biennale in June, for the month of June next year. And so that's obviously still happening. I'm still working on that. I have, on one hand, you know, this CERN project with Mark Mothersbaugh, which is sort of cutting edge data and high tech. And then on the other hand, he and I have been doing a postcard project, which was in support of USPS ahead of the election. And we got just tens of thousands of cards, and we're still running that because obviously people are still in lockdown. So there's going to be a installation exhibition of all the cards that we've received. And then, essentially a sort of the next record experience, which was going to be at the Art Institute of Chicago, was a new way of presenting an album as a secret communication system using code pioneered by Hedy Lamarr. But obviously museums have been hit really hard, so we're now figuring out where that's going to be installed. But a lot of the work for that has been done and is being done. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff on my, on the map. I often find the most interesting stuff is not on the map. It's always these detours that are actually the kind of best parts of the journey. But I think just, I don't know, what I hope is that we get more long-term, with our thinking. I think the digitalization of music has created access, but it's also devalued a lot. And we have a lot of noise, but we don't have a lot of curation. The album's essentially dead in many ways. And I'm not saying this in a dramatic, kind of nihilistic way, but it's just the truth. And so I think that idea of adopting a long view, things that aren't just for the day, it's not just how much gratification we get today, but what are we leaving for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years time? I think we need to think more like that and work more like that.
Yeah. Thank you so much to the three of you, to Beatie, to Laz, George. Really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to talk to us. So thank you very much.